Everyone, welcome back to another SUPboarder feature. This feature is going to be all about talking about design compromises or design trade-offs. For example, if you're looking at foiling boards, a really big foil board is super easy to stand on and it's great to get up on the foil, especially the first time we get going. But the design compromise is it's not very much fun when you're up on the foil. The board will feel really big. That is a classic design trade-off. In this feature, we're going to be speaking specifically about wings and their design trade-offs. So hopefully you can understand which wing is right for you, maybe for the sort of discipline you want to be using your wing in, or for your chosen level. Now we're going to get Will in on this video because he has been using so many wings over the last few months and he's been really digesting a lot of different content from a lot of different media sources and has a huge amount of knowledge on the subject about the wings. And hopefully we can help you understand the 6 key design trade-offs you need to be thinking about before you buy yourself your next wing. Right then, Will, where should we start?
Well, with design trade-offs, I think you've got to first think about what are the performance things that you're looking for in a wing.
Yeah.
Okay. So what do you look for in a wing?
Something that's light,
Something
that's very easy to handle, nice and stable,
yeah,
and gives me enough power to get up in lighter winds.
Yeah. I think power is a big one because obviously we all want to go foiling in as low a wind as possible, give us the biggest wind range. What about when you're wave riding?
Again, light wing, something that's really stable when it's flagging or when I'm parking the wing, and a wing that feels quite small for its size.
Yeah,
that's
so a lot about stability and how well it will, act when it's flagged out rather than being used as the sail.
Yeah, and I guess like we said in the intro, there's compromises, isn't there, to every one of those. Like I couldn't use the same one on flat water if I want super light wind to get up in light winds as I could do maybe wave riding.
Yeah, I think the development of wings has been really interesting because we're in third or fourth iterations of some wings, and we're starting to see some of those trade-offs driving how wings are specific for certain disciplines. But it's still really important to understand what trade-offs work for you to know what product to buy and what trade-offs you're willing to accept. Yeah,
definitely. I can see now you're saying it, because when we first started doing the wing test, there was just the wing. Yeah, wasn't it? We just went winging and we were like, hey, this is great. But now they're really into these disciplines, and you can really have a wing that does this and have it. You can get quite specific with what you want.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I think it's just how design's evolved. Don't forget that it was only about 4 years ago that we were all first jumping on those first wings, 2 wings that were very different. Yeah. First to market was the foil wing from Duotone, and then the Wing Surfer from Nash. And now we look at those and they're very different. And to be honest with you, I think they did a really good job as a first stab. And now I think a lot of people would look at particularly the foil wing and they were like, that thing's an animal. I remember using that, but actually how we've moved on in a very short amount of time is quite impressive.
Yeah. So what are the main design trade-offs you've noticed?
So canopy tension is a big one that can bring some pros and some cons. Dihedral angle, and what I mean by that is when you look at the wing from in front, the angle that the leading edge takes. Just general wing shape in terms of things like its sweep angle, leading edge diameter and leading edge pressure. Now that's a really interesting subject and something that we're starting to see different brands playing around with different things, publishing different pressures for different sizes and bits and pieces like that. And how does that relate to the diameter of the leading edge? So things are starting to get a bit intertwined now. Something that's becoming really interesting now, Canopy Fabric. There's different canopy fabrics out there. What do they do? And then finally, the argument for soft handles versus a boom versus rigid handles that kind of get put onto soft handles. Yeah. So that kind of design development that we're starting to see even more in 2023.
Okay, so why don't we start off with canopy tightness then?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting subject. So we're starting to see a real trend for more canopies going tighter and tighter at the moment. I think there's lots of reasons for that. One of them is you can get better power out of the wing, particularly if you've got some dihedral in it, such as something like the Duotone unit. It's got a bit of dihedral, it's got a tight canopy, it's got a lot of power, that wing. But the design trade-off you see with a tight canopy is that actually it becomes less stable when you're flagging that wing. So if you're using that in the surf or for a downwinder, a tight canopy is actually not going to be so desirable.
So is that where I'm thinking tight canopy for me, get up in light winds, loads of power on the flat, if I'm doing flat water winging, but when I go wave riding,
absolutely,
that's my compromise.
But also a tight canopy isn't going to, in a rested position, so when it's parked on the water, a tight canopy is going to be a little bit more lively. So potentially you could say not quite as good for a beginner and things like that.
That's definitely something we've noticed with the first duotone we ever used, or the first wing, wasn't it? That was definitely more rested, and that had a tighter canopy opposed to like the Nash.
Yeah, that was still a relatively tight canopy, but huge amounts of dihedral, and I think that is really impacting. You know, these sort of third, fourth generation duotone wings are still pretty lively in the water, but I think they're better for not just around canopy, but other things that they've brought into them.
We'll discuss about.
So kind of in summary, those tight canopies give you less stability, but more power, and they'll also offer less drag. So one of the things that is really interesting when you're wave riding, a tight canopy, you won't really feel it. The wing just not there. Whereas a flappy canopy, the wing will be super stable, but it will give you more drag because it's flapping about.
Okay.
So, you know, what do you want? You've got to find that point of tight enough canopy to give you power and low drag, but not too flappy and loose that it's slowing you down when you're riding. Because
so you could actually be slowed down by
absolutely
by your wing.
Yeah, you feel it on some of the earlier generation wings when you're riding. Like I find, particularly if I'm riding upwind on a wave, in particular conditions, that wing, you feel like this thing's like flogging around. It's like whoa, because so there's this sort of point that you have to reach of compromise in its design to give the performance that you want.
Yeah.
So tight canopy isn't giving you everything that's beneficial. You just have somewhere it will give you a trade-off, and that trade-off is that you lose a bit of stability. A good example of canopy tightness. This is a pretty tight canopy, I would say, on this V3 unit D Lab. Yeah. Whereas this Nash has a slightly floppier canopy, we'd say.
It's tighter than it was.
Yeah, I mean the first wing surfer was super loose, wasn't it?
And even this is the S26, the Nash Matador S27 LT, that's tighter than it was last year, so it's got it tightened up a little bit, but not as tight as this, no.
Yeah, but would you still say that's a powerful wing?
Yeah, I would still say it's got but is that from other elements?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's because it's got this super big front leading edge, which means you can get depth into the wing. So they're reaching that compromise in a slightly different way.
So this is where it gets not more confusing, but it's something you have to consider. There's more than just an element of tight canopy, soft canopy. And there's all the other things we're going to speak about now, which you have to think about as well to help you make sure you buy the best wing.
All of these things intertwine, and it's like a rabbit warren.
It must be amazing for the designers to really work out which bit they're going to pull out and put in to give the compromise.
Yeah.
Because,
and I think the designers who are developing and prototyping really well will be changing just one thing at a time to understand how things affect, and then bringing the things together. And it's because if you change too much, you've got no data, and you don't know where then you are running around in circles. Absolutely.
Okay, well, let's move ourselves on to the next point, which is the wing dihedrals. And just to summarise, if people haven't unsure what dihedral is, I've got some images up there, but it's really to do with how raked back the wings are, isn't it?
Yeah.
Compared to flat, as you're looking down across the back of the wing.
Yeah, so if you're looking at the wing from the front, from where your front handle is, the dihedral is where you get positive angle from the root of the wing, and anhedral is when you get negative. So you get some anhedral in foils, but in wings it's generally dihedral. So wing height dihedral, from kind of experience riding wings, I think that gives you power. It allows the designer to get shape into the wing, but I think resting stability is really affected by that dihedral. If the wing can sit flat on the water, particularly then it has a loose canopy, it will just sit there, and it's really, really user friendly for the beginner. But you know, as you progress your journey through winging, it doesn't really matter if you've got a lively wing when you're sitting trying to get going, because actually that's a really small part of your riding experience. But when you're learning, it takes a lot longer, and you need a piece of equipment that helps you. So the more intermediate and advanced wings are certainly now having more dihedral, tighter canopies, loads of power, but they're a bit of a nightmare to deal with in the water.
And just to summarise from somebody looking at it from a surf point of view, like for me, the dihedral versus the flat's generally more stable when you're flagging and parked. Is that still the case, or is that starting to change now with these new development wings, like these duotones that have moved on?
Well, I think that's really interesting. So a very flat wing with no dihedral will give you a really stable wing, right? But then you might get,
when you're parked,
when you're luffing the wing, or whatever we call it, but it might be flapping around, so it's going to give you a lot of drag.
Okay,
so that's the design trade-off that you have to think about there. So a beginner wing is probably like a nice flat wing. When we talk about beginner wings, I think a nice flat wing, not too much dihedral, maybe quite a floppy canopy.
A bit like the free wing goes. Yeah, that's nice.
Those type of wings will actually perform pretty well in the surf, because they'll be nice, stable, parked, but they might not be as fast as you want them to be if you're surfing bigger ocean swells, or downwinding on bigger, faster ocean swells. They might limit your speed. You're on a really fast foil and you've got this massive drag of your wing. So it's just those things you need to understand.
Yeah, very interesting. Okay, so what's next? Wing shapes or sweep?
Yeah, so sweep is quite an interesting one. And I think it's really subtle in designs. And what I mean by sweep is the angle that the wing, when you look on the plan shape of it,
the outline
this
shape.
is, as I go from, that's high sweep, that's low sweep. Okay. And a really good example.
Raked back wings, like a top,
fighter jet. So a fighter jet, high sweep.
Yeah.
Glider, those gliders that get towed up into the air, and so they don't have any propulsion. Low sweep, because it's very square, right? But in wings, a really good example is the difference between the slick SLS and the slick. So the slick was the replacement for the Echo.
The duotone wings,
very square outline, right? You get the area in a smaller wingspan, right? So the negative of sweeping is that you have to go wider.
Got it, yeah.
Now, what's negative of going wider with your wingspan?
Just dragging wingtips when you're trying to get up in a lot of winds.
Kind of makes it not so easy to use, doesn't it?
Okay.
So
is that why the more beginner wings, again, go back to that free wing go, they've got sweep, but they're obviously quite a lot of area for their length, for their width, aren't they? Yeah, they're kind of like short and they're almost like a square. Yeah. I wouldn't say they look particularly sort of pleasing to the eye. They've got big shoulders on them. But then you could use it when you're not on the foil on a SUP, couldn't you?
Yeah.
Because it's that shorter, more compact shape.
Yeah, and really interesting observation when I used the slick, compared to its previous generation and compared to the slick SLS now, even though it's shorter, if you do catch a wingtip, you're catching a really big chunk of wingtip, because it's got loads of, it's not a fine wingtip, it's a big square wingtip. Yeah. You really notice it. So
there's a lot of drag.
Although they got it really compact, it also, when you do hit, you really hit, and it probably pull you off. Yeah. Whereas these touch, and you're like,
the little duotones, and they're smaller, and diameter's smaller as well. Obviously.
Yeah. So the benefit of higher sweep is that you get better stability.
Okay.
So the reason I think that the unit has got slightly more sweep on it is because it's purely designed for wave riding and downwinding, and you want something that's really stable when you're luffing it.
Okay. And are they faster through the air? As in they won't drag if you're flagging them again?
Well, that's coming down to the dragginess of the wing is a factor of its canopy tension and probably its leading edge diameter. So if it's a big fat leading edge, the wing's going to be super stiff, but you've got more drag just going through the air. It's like make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. So is that a good point to move on to leading edge diameter?
Yeah.
Because it sort of links all of the bits we've spoken about already together, doesn't it?
Yeah. So I think when you're a wing designer, you're trying to get power into your wing, but you're also trying to make it fast, because some people just want to go fast, right? Wing racing, wing foil racing is probably going to be developed.
Yeah, and that's really taking off in the last year and a half, 2 years, and it's going to go way further, probably than the wave riding, to be honest, because more people have access to flat water, haven't they?
So what is interesting here is if you drop the diameter of your wing, leading edge, you reduce the drag. And I think when I was listening to a really great podcast from Blue Planet, and from Ken Winner, who's the designer of these duotone wings, they talking about how some testing they've done looking at diameter and things, and they can say, yeah, we can definitely make a wing go faster with a smaller leading edge. But the trade-off from going smaller leading edge, if you want to keep the same stiffness in the wing, you have to put more pressure in it. And you put more pressure in it, you are then, the pressure that you can put in the wing is limited by the fabric that you're using, be it Dacron or somewhere between Dacron and Alula. You know, you can't just put ultimate pressure in. It's limited by the fabric.
Yeah, because these seams they're pushed quite a lot anyway, aren't they? At 7 to 9 psi.
Yeah, and you're right to say seams because it's really limited by the fabric and then the closing seam. So that seam is just getting pulled apart by the pressure. It can only be built so strong. It can only withstand a certain amount.
And then it takes the impact of you smashing it on the water as well, which hires the pressure inside.
Absolutely. So if you go small, you lose stiffness, which gives you power. If you go really small, you also lose some of the ability to get depth into the wing, which gives you power.
Yeah.
So you can have a faster wing if you go smaller leading diameter, but then you have to have higher pressure, so you're putting a bit more risk on that that wing for its durability. So all these trade-offs. So
do you think in the future then, like for racing, for instance, there's going to be racers that have got really expensive wings that might blow out after 4 goes, but they can pump 10 psi, 11 psi in them, smaller leading front edges, just to get that speed gain?
Yeah,
it's a bit like Formula One. There's like that top level where they're like, okay, this wing's going to be a write-off in 3 sessions, but it's going to get me that, hopefully, that podium win or whatever.
Yeah. Well, what's really interesting about this Alula fabric is that it's light, which is great all round. The lighter we can make a product, generally the better, but it's also quite stiff. But if you put holes in it, sewing a seam into it, from what I've learned, it loses a lot of its weakness. So you've still got the limiting factor of that closing seam, that even though the material's got way better properties, it's the leading edge closing seam that is going to give you...
That is the point.
That's the thing that's holding you back. Yeah, so the trade-off really with the diameter of the wing, smaller diameter, less drag, goes faster. You've got to put higher pressure in it, which means you're pushing the fabrics more, but you'll also reduce the amount of power. So designers have really got to find that
because they need that depth when you mean by power. They need the depth in the wing, don't they?
So my gut feel was this wing, it's got a load of power. We know this wing's got a lot of power, isn't it? It's
the Nash Matador LT,
Yeah, the Nash Matador's got a lot of power, but I think it will feel quite slow compared to some other wings with much tighter canopies and smaller leading edges, might have more power, but then this might win on the stability front. Who knows? We only really know if we put them up head to head.
Yeah.
So another, I think, quite interesting bit of insight that I gained from something I listened to and watched was how lower diameter leading edges need higher pressures, but so you can get a faster wing, right? But they also become more sensitive to changes in pressure. So if you don't get your pressure right, it really affects how the wing performs and feels.
So if you go out of 5 psi opposed to 7, it's like a massive difference.
Yeah, whereas, you know, I don't pay a massive amount of attention to what's on the gauge. But
well, the range, 7 to 9 psi is most of it. It's quite a big range, isn't it?
Exactly. But we should, as riders, we should actually be thinking a little bit about pressure, because if I drop a bit of pressure out of these wings, I feel it makes the wing a little bit easier to use for me. It makes it a little bit softer, which it all makes sense, right? But if you've got a really small diameter and you're not putting the right pressure in it, you'll get a poor experience. No brand
like going on the road bike with 20 psi in your tyre, isn't it?
Yeah.
Opposed to a mountain bike sort of thing. It's like a...
Yeah, I think so, yeah. You need to... And, you know, no one's really talking about tuning your wing for your weight, and that's the point we can come on to a bit later.
Oh, okay. Let's move on to what holds it all together. Canopy Fabric, because that's changed a lot in the last...
Oh, yeah. And
a lot in the last 2 years, actually.
Yeah, well, there's lots to talk about canopies, and I suppose... I don't think we've really seen the main result of what these changes could give, and that's about a wing that lasts longer and the material doesn't stretch out and bag out. So what we want our wing to do, if we spend lots of money on it is last a long time, and because they're fabrics that stretch over time, they kind of bag out a little bit, and they don't feel as crisp and as direct, and therefore not as powerful as they are when they're new. So what the designers and the brands have been doing is looking at better fabrics, but there's a trade-off in the type of fabric that you use. So Mod 3, which is what this duotone unit is made out of, is a stiffer fabric, a sort of stiffer polyester-based fabric that doesn't stretch so much. The fabric is, from what I think, it's not created for specifically duotone. Duotone just brand it for their own purposes. But it's come from the sail making market.
And all this fabric is still a sailing, isn't it? There's no specific wing.
Yeah.
It's all just generally sailing.
So yeah, this Nash is made out of a kite material. Kite material is generally just an evolution of a spinnaker material from a boat. A spinnaker on a sailing boat needs to give a little bit like a kite.
Okay, yeah.
It just needs to have a little bit of stretch, because when you get a big gust of wind, you don't want that spinnaker to just rip apart. It's got to have a little bit of flex in it for it to do its job really well. But over time, those materials they keep stretching, and then they kind of just kind of just give up.
And they don't go back. They don't
go back. Yeah,
you can
suppose
see
they lose their elasticity.
Yeah,
a bit.
you can see it sometimes, can't you, with older wings that the canopy where they've been stitched. That's still the same, but there's like little bags in between those little canopy sections, isn't they? They don't look. They're definitely not very aerodynamic.
Yeah. So wing manufacturers have been looking for materials that stretch less, and what they've, I think, found is that a material it's a little bit it's a bit crispier than this kite material. It feels a bit thicker, maybe, but it's generally a bit stiffer, and ultimately I think it's a bit stronger. And the reason that I think they've used it is I think it will last longer. It won't stretch out over time, but there's a trade-off with using that material.
Is there?
Yeah. So
cost?
Good question. I don't know how it affects the cost, but when I've just been using these wings and comparing them to each other, what I've really felt is that they're a bit more twitchy. They're a bit harder. They're more direct, which feels really good, but takes a little bit of getting used to. But also, I think probably less good for that really beginner
intermediate
rider, because it kind of just doesn't give you have less wriggle room. It's a bit like the difference between using a more intermediate base foil or a medium aspect foil compared to a high aspect foil. You just have less room for error.
In higher winds, it's obviously going to be even more twitchy, and if you're at that top of that wind window, like, it would be a lot less comfortable than a softer material, wouldn't it?
Yeah, because it's just not giving much. And I kind of felt it on my body. I felt it was, I shouldn't really ache that much after that session, but I think it's just because I'm a bit more having to tune it a little bit more, and I use these wings in some really gusty conditions, and that's where I really noticed it. On the flip side of that, that stiffness gives you power.
So in the lighter winds and the moderate winds, it's much better.
You're putting higher percentage of your pumping energy into that wing, then transferring through your body into your foil and getting you going. Whereas if the wing is spongy, it's not doing that as well. Another trade-off though is that it's a little bit heavier.
Oh, is it?
So this Mod 3 stuff is a little bit heavier, but I think it's marginal. And I would say in general, I really like the way it felt. I think I'm just highlighting that there is a bit of a design trade-off there.
Okay. But you probably notice there's probably more weight you would feel with other design features that, like canopy tension, leading edge, that you would physically feel, opposed to the physical weight of the wing, if that makes sense. As in, if it was designed a certain way, like these duotones, they're designed quite light anyway. They feel quite light in your hands.
Light and nimble,
So the wing might still be heavier than another wing, but it could still feel lighter when you're riding with it. Even though it's got that material.
I suppose going forward, people are going to be wanting to see improved fabrics in their canopies so that their products last longer.
Yeah, that's the one.
But you're just going to have to accept that if we put something different in, it's going to affect price, and somehow it's going to affect performance. And the way that it will affect performance is probably around that that sort of stiffer feel, and weight has an effect in various elements of winging, be it transitions or luffing out your wing. So yeah, but you know, they've done a lot of work on the windows. They've taken a bit of weight out the windows, potentially to compromise the extra weight that goes into the wing through fabric. So yeah.
Yeah, and the big one as well, you know, none of these brands have been using this material for like 2 or 3 years. So they don't know how long it's going to last.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's, unfortunately, we're all going to have to sort of roll with that one and see how long it lasts, and then we'll know if it goes into production next year or the year after. Yeah. Because, you know.
What I see going on with canopies at the moment, you've either got like this Nash, you've got a kite material or a spinnaker material. You've got the sort of more kind of membrane materials that go into the racing wing. So you're seeing sort of like laminates, membranes. Those are going to be really stiff and really hard.
And I think fast.
Yeah, fast. Lots of stiffness and power into that wing. So you're seeing the sort of high-end racing wings. Starboard's Pro's going to have that type of material in it. And then Mod 3, I think, is somewhere in between. And where I think this material has come from is somewhere between, for sailing boats, it's a sail that is for a particular purpose, and it just happens to suit wings possibly quite well. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's not, you know, it's all just coming from the technology that's being developed from sailing boats, I believe.
Yeah. So we're going to see it. We probably will see this Mod 3, this stuff in a lot more. It might not be called that. Yeah. In a lot more of the brands as well.
Yeah, I think Mod 3 is just the Duotone's branding of it. I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised if
well, like everything, there's
always
somebody copies it and somebody gets it, and you know, it changes, even if it's changed a little bit. And
and that's what the brands have to just keep up with that. Don't they?
Okay, so one of the last points, and I think it's quite a big point, is handles or booms.
Yeah, again, it's something that a lot of people are talking about in winging at the moment, and definitely seeing a bigger shift for more of the brands going towards booms or rigid handles. Things like that, and I think there's a reason for it. Yeah,
I mean, that goes back to the first test, doesn't it? First test we did, and again, 2 different wings, the Duotone and the Nash, polar opposites. Yeah, I love that Duotone, I love that boom, I love that rigidity, but then I am a windsurfer, and you were as well. But I'm still like, the controllability. Yeah,
I think. You know, we had that first one. It didn't have a carbon boom; it had an aluminium boom. It's quite heavy, much heavier than air in a nice air strut, right? So it did feel heavy on a transition. It would, you know, if in a lighter winds, you know, the tail of it would
sink
a bit. So booms are great. They're really direct. You can wing one-handed. You've got infinite positions along that boom. Bringing in a lighter boom has really helped the cause for that boom. I really, really like using that Duotone Slick SLS. I think it's a fantastic wing, and you get you just kind of got more options. I don't have to find a handle, I just find the boom, and it doesn't matter where I grab, I've grabbed it. Yeah. And then I tune it. Coming from windsurfing, that's a really awesome, that feels natural for me. Yeah. But there's a reason that when windsurfers are all going around with booms rather than handles, right? Because they want that infinite positioning.
Yeah. Is there still like a divide you find from what you've been learning with people that are like, you know, I'm a surfer, I don't do windsurfing, I don't want a boom. Is it or is it just because of feeling thing?
I think you're seeing people were sort of talking about the windsurfers seem to like boomed wings, and the new people who have come from kiting or whatever seem to just like handles. But I think as they progress through the sport, they're maybe realising that something more rigid gives them better performance, better tunability, feels a bit better. So something like this Nash Matador LT, that's got long handles, which give you a bit of tunability. And then the unit D-Lab that we've got behind us, that's got rigid individual handles that are about, I don't know, what's that, about 10 inches long? Yeah. 12 inches long? Yeah. So you get a bit of tunability. But when I get on the Slick SLS with the full boom, I still prefer it. Yeah. I think. Yeah. But its trade-off, still a bit heavier. Still sinks a little bit. Ultimately, the wing without any rigid handle is probably going to be a bit lighter because the fabric is just a bit lighter, but it's floppy, so it's not going to give you so much of a direct feel. Kind of just depends what you're looking for.
Yeah, it depends what you're looking for, and that's interesting because we've got a review of the free wing, the V3. Yeah, I really love that wing. It gives you the option of putting a carbon handle on and taking off the fabric handle, like you said. So you have that potential option of having it or not. I don't personally see why somebody wouldn't have the carbon handle on there because it's light and it's a cost thing, I suppose.
Well, it costs more, but it's also an addition because I think there's a bit of a trend going on that maybe handles are better, and it's all a trade-off, isn't it? And you get disadvantages for being on a boom and disadvantages for being on soft handles, and disadvantages and advantages for being somewhere in between. It comes down to what you're looking for, and having been using these duotone wings a lot and really getting my head into them, I can see why they've gone down the fabric choices and the handle options on each model, because it kind of fits where they're trying to place the wings, which is super interesting. Bit of a teaser there for the comparison review that's coming out.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Only disadvantage for me for handles is when you smack them in your face, it hurts more.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Oh, sorry, booms. Yeah, that's the one.
yeah, and that is one of the negatives. Everything's a trade-off.
Everything's a trade-off.
You can never have a product that is perfect, because something that gives high performance will always compromise something else. So it's about understanding what performance attribute you want.
Yeah, and being realistic with your performance attribute, being realistic with you as the rider.
Yeah.
Like if you think you're going to bust 25-foot jumps, like, okay, well, really?
Yeah.
You get your fall out the wall yet?
Yeah.
Let's be realistic about it.
Yeah, the equipment, the equipment. There's not always a solution for the equipment that will make you better. You have to sometimes just accept that the equipment is probably as good as it can be. You need to work on your technique.
The amount of questions that we get, don't we, about that?
Fascinating.
Oh, shall I get another foil? I've got these three and I've got this wing, but I think I need this to help. No, you just need to relax.
You just need to work on your technique.
Work on your technique. Or I can't get up on the foil in light winds. What am I doing wrong? I need to buy a bigger wing. That's the one, isn't it? No. You just need to work on. You're not a heavy person. You'll be fine. Just work on your technique.
I kind of like using a 4 meter wing the whole time, because I think I can pump it so much more effectively than a 5. And when you're riding, it feels so much better.
Yeah, it's going off. We're going off on a thing there, but it's like kite surfing or windsurfing. I always used to use the smallest kite or the smallest windsurfing rig as possible, and get going. Because then when you're riding and you're up on the foil, not on the foil, but you're planing or on a wave, that's what you want.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same.
Yeah.
So a lot of people getting in this, like, I need an 8 meter wing. It's like, no, you don't. Just
diminishing returns for what benefit it's going to give you.
Obviously, there was an advantage if you're 120 kilos and you need that more power. But for a lot of you out there, technique will overrule that. Okay, so that covers the design compromises. Is there any other observations that you've noticed, understood, of your findings over the last few months of riding all these wings?
Yeah, I think that from sort of riding and listening to a lot of stuff and speaking to designers or listening to things that designers have put out there, I think thinking more about tuning your wing for your weight is quite important, because I think it gives quite a lot of tunability that maybe we're not really taking advantage of. So all of these wings are designed and prototyped and put into production by a team. Teams can be various sizes, a designer plus his riders or her riders, and they're probably optimizing for a weight of rider, the average weight of what I think their customer is. But it's not going to be everyone. So I think particularly if you're at the lower end and the higher end of what might be average. So what would you say average? What do you think these wings have been designed for? What's the average rider? It's really hard to know, but
well, you're a bit light.
I'm 67 to 70 kilos, so I think I'm quite light. I think these are probably more aimed at 80, 85 kilos, because that's probably where a lot of people are, 90 kilos. So these, I think I can drop a little bit of pressure out these wings.
Okay.
They still feel good, but they're not so, they're like almost not so harsh on my shoulders. It's like putting a softer paddle shaft or a smaller paddle blade on. Just takes a little bit of power out of it, which means that it's less intense on my body and it feels nicer on the water. So I think thinking about that tunability is really good, particularly if you're at the bottom end and the top end of the weight scales. So if you're a super light rider, I think you definitely need to be thinking about pressure and what's going to work for me.
So if their range of pressures like 7 to 9? pressure. I don't know I know the Nash is at 7 to 9. What is it on the duotones? Do they get a range, or do they just
They just give you a number.
Do they? What is their number? 8?
Yeah, and interestingly, the Alula wing is a different pressure to the Dacron wing.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. Show to me, it shows that they've been doing a lot of development on this, and they understand the fabrics and the materials that are put into it and how they can perform.
Yeah. So for instance, let's take this Nash wing and a lot of other wings. 7 to 9. So lighter people, you're 70 kg and under, definitely having it at 7. And if you're 90, well, it's
just
great, right?
Just try it when you go out. Just drop a little bit of pressure and see how it makes your wing feel. Like I'm talking like 1 psi, but just thinking about when you pump your wing up, just make sure you get it right, because that's how they've designed it. But then think about how should you change it based on your weight. So I would generally say if you're a bit lighter, you want a little bit less pressure on it, because you don't rely on that stiffness of the wing to give you power. And you haven't quite got as much strength and frame to be able to support that power. So you can tune it a little bit.
Interesting, yeah. Anything else that you've noticed?
Just that what I really got from the Blue Planet interview, it's really good, and you should all go and watch it. It's long, but watch it, with Ken Winner, was that...
And Ken Winner is the designer of Duotone, if you're aware of that.
He's really experienced. He's like their lead designer.
And a sailing
I think he's a windsurfer. He's designed lots of really cool stuff, really experienced. And he was just talking about how if you go down from, say, a 5 to a 2.5 wing, you don't just scale it down. Things like the leading edge diameter changes. And what it made me think is that you've got loads of people making wings, designing wings, and they need to prototype and test at all these different sizes to figure out what Ken had figured out with these. But how much do we know that happens?
Yeah, good point.
Because, so you can't just scale something down. Like we see it a lot in surf sups, and the boards just get scaled down. But does scaling work? So when you see,
because if you like everything you've just discussed in this previous video, if you just scale stuff down, it's going to make a massive difference to all those key elements, isn't it? Canopy tension, the size of the tube, the stiffness. Yeah. It might not work, just bringing the number down 10%.
And it doesn't. And I think they've proved it through testing and probably some modelling as well. And then, there's a lot of science behind scaling. And if you want to get really geeky, you talk about America's Cup foiling boats. They're developing on scaled versions of what they're going to sail the America's Cup on. So the America's Cup is on 75-foot boats, and they're doing all their testing on 40-foot boats. Now, to get the data and the understanding to transfer across isn't just a case of you times it by, almost double it, don't you? But it's not like that. It doesn't work like that. No. Scaling is like really... Yeah, because really different.
Water's the same density, air's the same density.
Exactly. You're not scaling all those other environmental factors. So it just got me thinking about how scaling isn't necessarily the answer in all the sports. So therefore, how many designers or wing developers or wing brands are just scaling? How do we know? Maybe we should start doing a few more measurements. I don't know. I haven't got an answer. It's just an observation.
And the easy way is definitely you can notice it. If you look at the catalogue and you can go, oh, that 3 metres is a completely different... In fact, I'm going to bring the free wing in. I can't remember which one it is. I remember looking at the catalogue before and going, wow, the 3.5 or 3 metre is a completely different shape to the 5.
Well, that suggests that they understand that you can't just scale. So it's good. And I'm not saying that people aren't doing it, but are they doing it?
On the flip side, if you do want to buy a cheap wing and you're, just from a basic brand, the guarantee they've probably made the 5 metre. Yeah. They've probably made, so actually that is, if you're going to go for the 5 metre, which most people are, that wing's probably fine. That probably doesn't need to be scaled. If you were going to buy the 3 metre off of them, but then maybe a lot of the cheap brands I'm thinking about, they only have a 4, 5 and 6.
Yeah. So they might have tested them all, so but I suppose it made me think that, sometimes people say, oh, why are these things so expensive? It's just a 4 metre bit of fabric. But the design and the development that goes into it, it's not simple. There's a lot of prototyping that will go into these products, and that costs money, and that's why you get a good product, and that's why we've seen such an incredible acceleration and improvement and evolution of wing designs over the last 4 years, which is, I compare these wings from Duotone to the first wing that I ever used, which was that Duotone foil wing. Think of all the names.
What was it? Is it called the foil wing? It
Foil,
was.
foil wing, yeah.
Yeah.
Wing foil.
I don't think it had a name on it. It was just
no, it was called a foil. Yeah. Anyway, it's a completely different kettle of fish, and you know they didn't even know what people wanted when they first designed these wings. They were like, what is even this sport? But it's really cool to see.
It was just something you could hold in your
different.
hand that will give you enough power to get up on the foil. That was
Yeah,
all
yeah.
the element, the design brief. Like, light, easy enough to get on the foil, and then we'll worry about the rest later.
Yeah, yeah.
Not there wasn't anything wrong with that. It's just that
Yeah.
didn't know that downwinding and surfing and all that sort of stuff was going to
Exactly.
kick into place. Well, definitely I've learnt a lot on this from this session, talking about different key elements and design trade-offs. Hopefully you've been able to park it in the back of your brains, and next time you're going to be buying or looking at a wing, you can think about these things we've spoken about and make sure you're getting the right wing for you.
Yeah, yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, there's going to be lots more videos. As I said, we've got the Duotone reviews, we've got some more SUPboarder Pro stuff on these, we've got quite a lot of wing stuff coming out over the next month, haven't we?
Yeah.
But it's really interesting, and it's going to go a long way.
Yeah, it's so exciting. Yeah.
Maybe we should do this again in 2 years' time,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and see how you'd be like, oh yeah, we said this was going to happen, and that was completely wrong. It's gone away from this fabric and gone off of this fabric, and
Yeah, yeah. I should do a long drive to Europe again, because that's how I kind of got my head into it.
podcasts.
Listening to a lot of stuff and then trying to turn it into this video, really.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Hope you've enjoyed it. Hopefully it wasn't too long. Comments, questions, if you've got any feedback on any of these wings as well, let us know. And obviously more questions, get on to SUPboarder Pro.
And also, if you don't think that our analysis is right on this,
Yeah.
let us know, because it's just,
Yeah, got to
not,
remember,
not an expert really.
everybody's learning, even the designers
Yeah.
at this point. So nobody's going to say, this is the way. I don't think anybody can be like, that is wrong, this is right. It's just a feeling and
Yeah.
where we're at in the market right
Yeah,
now.
there's lots of really good products out there. Like, I think that's important to say. There's loads of great products out there.
As long as you buy the right one for you. Thanks, Will. See you later. Bye.